Good afternoon. Thank you so much for being here in our Innovation Outpost space for what I hope will be an insightful and helpful conversation. Thank you all for your participation as well. I'm Russell Lowry Hart, president of Amarillo College. I'm pleased to welcome you to Amarillo College's Innovation Outpost, the place that we used our bond revenue to build a place that can help our community adjust a human plus machine reality that's coming over the next decade. And a place that in a couple of months will have the country's first fully automated restaurant. So I look forward to seeing you back here for that grand opening. Amarillo College is pleased to welcome you to this event on behalf of its Board of Regents, 3 of which are here, Irene Hughes, Peggy Thomas, and David Woodburn. Thank you all for your leadership of this college, and thank you all for your support of Amarillo College. Recently named the best college in the country. We already knew that, but it's nice to have affirmation. So thank you all so much.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Matt Ewalt. I work for the Texas Tribune as our Director of Events and Live Journalism, and am happy to welcome all of you here in person in Amarillo, and for those joining us online for this conversation with Amarillo lawmakers and community leaders about the 2023 legislative session, what it means for Amarillo, for the Panhandle, and for communities around the state. Today's program is moderated by my Tribune colleague, Jamie Lozano-Carver, who will introduce our panel in just a minute. I want to thank today's sponsors. Our event is presented by Texas State Technical College and Lone Star College. Our major sponsors include Texas Rural Funders, Amarillo National Bank, Raise Your Hand Texas, and the TLL Temple Foundation. Though corporate sponsors and donors underwrite this event, they play no role in determining the content, speakers, or line of questioning. Also want to thank President Russell Lowry Hart and Amarillo College for hosting today's event. Before we begin, I do want to take a moment to thank our Texas Tribune members joining us in person and online today. If you value events like this and you're not yet a member, please do consider supporting the Tribune. You can head to texastribune.org/donate. And the Texas Tribune Festival is happening in downtown Austin this fall from September 21st through the 23rd. Join us for a program full of big thinking conversations headlined by both names you know and names you should. Learn more at tribfest.org. Just some housekeeping notes about today's program. We will have about 40 minutes or 45 minutes for our conversation with 15 minutes for questions from the audience. Please do remember to keep your questions to those that end with a question mark. Please silence your cell phones. And if you'd like to tweet from this event, please use the hashtag #TTEvents. And now, to begin today's program and introduce our panelists, here's our moderator for today's event, Jamie Lozano-Carver.
Thanks, Matt, and good morning to everybody here in person and everyone watching online. As Matt mentioned, I am Jamie Lozano-Carver. I'm the Texas Tribune's High Plains reporter based out in Lubbock, and I drive up here to Amarillo, so this was very nice today. I wanted to thank y'all all again for joining us, and especially to thank our panelists for being here today. Of course, we'll be talking about the legislative session, so I think all 3 of these are the perfect people to be talking about how that worked out this year and, of course, how that's going to impact the Panhandle. So let me start by introducing State Representative For Price. He has represented House District 87 since 2011, and now in his 7th term, Price serves on the Natural Resources Committee, the Public Health Committee, and the Select Committee on Healthcare Reform. John T. Smithy has served in the Texas House of Representatives since 1985, representing the 86th District. He is a member of the Juvenile Justice and Family Issues Committee and the State Affairs Committee. We also have Carolee Clay, an Amarillo native who I'm sure many of you in this room are familiar with. She is the Senior Vice President of the Amarillo Area Foundation, and she oversees HR, IT, operations, communications, marketing, and strategic initiatives. As Matt mentioned before, we'll be saving 15 minutes towards the end for questions from the audience. And as he said, try to keep it concise just so that way we can answer as many as possible. And I guess first, we should start by mentioning that this event was planned whenever the session looked like it was going to be a regular session and would end as normal, which obviously did not end up happening. The Senate is in session at this very moment, but clearly the House is not. So representatives, tell us a little bit about what's going on right now and, when y'all might go back.
So I'll start, and John, I'm sure will correct me, but first of all, thank you all for allowing us to do this today, and I'm grateful to be here. The session procedurally did end the regular session on time on the 29th of May, and the governor called us right back 9 o'clock that evening to the next calendar day. So we went back in, and he had two items on the call for us to take up. One was a tax relief charge that required us to provide tax relief, property tax relief that is, solely by the use of compression, which a lot of people have asked me, what does that mean? And that is really a method through which you buy down M&O property tax, the school district portion on your tax bill to a certain level, whatever money you're willing to do that with, and the state will make the district whole. And so essentially about 50 cents of every dollar of your tax bill is property taxes, school taxes, ISD taxes, and that is where the governor and really the House said that would be a good way for everybody to realize the money that's being allocated and appropriated for tax relief. The House actually passed three different bills, a bill that had just compression, which we passed in the special session, tax bill that had compression plus caps on growth from one year to the next, and a homestead exemption that was heightened. The Senate plan was basically compression plus a homestead exemption, a heightened homestead exemption. So we didn't agree, and in the special session, the governor said, well, I'm going to take out the part everybody disagrees with and just go with compression. So we passed that immediately, and then we also passed a bill that would require some heightened penalties on human smuggling and the use of stash houses. And that was something the governor said, those are two things that I want to do first. And he indicated at the time we would have multiple special sessions, but that's what he wanted done first. So those are the only charges that we had, and the House took those up and passed them immediately. That went to the Senate. Now, when I say immediately, we did it in one day, and then we adjourned. And so that was a sort of take it or leave it approach to the Senate, which typically, whether we've been on the receiving end of that before and on the giving end. It's not well received when you're on the take it or leave it end of an ultimatum like that. And so the Senate wasn't excited to receive that. They've been meeting and passing their own versions of bills, some of which seem to be outside the call language that the governor issued to us. But they will, they've adjourned for today. They're coming back in Tuesday. And as I understand it, we'll see what they do. But my guess would be that they wrap up their business and we will not reach agreement during this first called special session, and the governor will call us back pretty quickly to try again.
Well, that's my perception. It's interesting. I think everyone's a little skeptical of the term property tax relief. The legislature has been reducing property taxes for 20 years, and nobody's taxes seem to go down. They always just go up. And so there's a little skepticism there as well. But we do have some money available in the budget, largely because of inflation, partially because of a good budget this time, a good revenue forecast, to make some significant compression or to affect the property tax downward, or at least inhibit some of the growth. And the irony is, everybody agrees we want to do this. The problem is, how do you do it? And that's where the disagreement is. And we're going to argue about it so long that it's going to be too late to do it for this next tax year. That's my concern. Right now, what the Senate wants to do is to go to a homestead exemption of $100,000. And so the House version compresses the tax rate. Now, the practical difference of that is that the compression will provide some benefit to every taxpayer, whether property taxpayer, whether it's commercial, homestead, or whatever. The Senate version is weighted more toward the homestead owners, homeowners. And so the solution, in my view, and I don't know how Ford feels about this, but the solution, in my view, is obvious. It's right there on the table. You just compromise between the House and the Senate version. You raise the homestead exemption, maybe not to 100,000, but we're higher than it is now, and you compress the rate. And if you do those two, you have a deal. Everybody gets to go home, and there's some reduction to property taxes when you get your tax bill this fall. That's what needs to be done. It's probably what will be done in the end. And so it's somewhat frustrating that it hasn't been done already, I think, for all of us, and I know it is for the taxpayers.
And I want to add one thing, which is I think John's exactly right. And I think the good news through all of this haze is that the amount of money is not being argued about in terms of the tax cut. We're arguing about how to make a property tax cut effective, but not whether or not to do it. And so I think ultimately it will happen. My understanding is we've got a constitutional amendment that goes along with our proposed tax cut so that it doesn't count against the spending limit that we currently work under. This is an unusual event, and for that to pass and be on the ballot in the fall as a constitutional amendment proposal, it would have to get through the legislative process no later than August the 9th, I believe, is the deadline. And so that being the case, I don't think we will be waiting till the end of the summer or the fall to take this up. I think we'll be taking it up earlier rather than later so that if it's going to pass, we have the opportunity to get it before the voters on the fall election.
And we know a lot happened this session, but let's talk for a minute about what didn't happen, particularly whenever it comes to the budget. We did see that teacher pay raises and investments in school funding didn't happen, among other objectives that would have been really beneficial to rural areas. Carolee, I want to hear from you. Tell us about how those decisions can impact these communities here in the Panhandle.
Well, I think some things that didn't happen that we found disappointing was early childhood education and just a lack of interest. It seemed to pick that up. We know that it's important for our kids because from 0 to 5 is 90% of brain development. So that is a really crucial time for our children to be ready for school, which then leads to, are we setting up our K through 12 to fail? Because they're having kids come into kindergarten that aren't ready to learn. But then also, we're affecting our workforce in that people can't get back to work because they don't have accessible, affordable childcare. So there's a lot of layers to early childhood education that is affecting many people, whether you have kids or not. Whether you're eating in a restaurant and you can't get service, or whether you're a parent who's wanting to get back into the workforce and you can't find affordable childcare. So that was something I think that we would like to see more action on. I'd even love to talk to both of you about what that would look like for you all, what information you would need, what would help move that.
Would either of you like to respond?
Well, yeah, I mean, there were some frustrations as far as what didn't pass. The House voted and passed, I think either unanimously or close to unanimously, a significant teacher pay raise this time and additional money for local school districts, which is badly needed, particularly for our rural districts. That got waylaid somewhere between the House and the Senate, and basically it's become, the teacher pay raise has become a bargaining chip in the voucher debate. And so we'll see where that goes. But, I mean, Ford and I both represent a lot of teachers, and a number of my teachers are like single mothers who have multiple children. They're trying to make ends meet, and they're hit with inflation just like the rest of us. And so I think the teacher pay raise is a pretty important thing right now. Really, not even to get ahead, but just to keep even with where they've been. It's a pretty human problem that we really need to deal with, and hopefully that gets done before the end of the summer.
And when it comes to early childhood, intervention and early child care and the supporting that, I think that has a lot of support from various corners of the legislature. It wasn't something during the appropriations process that seemed to gain enough traction to rise to the surface in terms of being prioritized over other areas of spending in terms of Article 3, which is the area that the budget really directs all of its educational spending, both public and higher education, or through other avenues. Although I think that we have a tremendous workforce demand in Texas. I have not had discussion with anybody in the private sector or the public sector that doesn't think they can find enough people to fill the jobs that they have. So that problem may persist, and I think it will help in future legislative cycles to really try to do more to not only build a better workforce, and that's one aspect of it, but to retain the folks that we have in the jobs that we need them in. And then in terms, I think, of teachers, John's exactly right. In the Senate, that got coupled with the voucher proposal, basically the Senate Bill 8 type proposal. And so essentially when it came back to the House, the up or down vote was, you can accept the teacher pay raise, but you're also going to have to vote for a universal voucher, which in the House was kind of a non-starter, and the votes weren't there to do that. And so it really, left us leaving the session without either of those things having crossed the goal line. And so the governor's already indicated we'll come back for vouchers. Wouldn't be totally shocking to me if part of that process was also, more budgetary with regard to proposed increases for teachers across the state of Texas. When it comes to retired teachers, the legislature did pass significant legislation through the budget to not only give retired teachers another supplemental 13th check, but then to also give them a COLA, which was something that hadn't been done in over a couple of decades. And so it was significant. So if you're over 75, it's higher, I think $7,500. If you're younger than that, it tiers down. But that was a significant investment, over $1.6 billion by the state. So I know there's a desire to do that, and I wouldn't be shocked at all if in a special session we address both of them.
And, speaking of the school vouchers, we know that Governor Abbott has been very adamant about that getting passed in some form. Do y'all see that happening in the future, or is it going to take dragging through more special sessions?
Well, there have never been enough votes in the House to pass a voucher, particularly a universal voucher program. Four and I represent rural districts. I represent districts that the entire school district has less than 100 students. And it's a very diverse state. You got, Houston Independent School District, which is not an independent school district anymore. It's being run by TEA. But on the other hand, you have some of the districts we represent, like I say, with less than 100 students. And it's hard to find a plan or a program that works for all of those districts. And so I think that's one of our concerns is that if you craft this plan, it's going to take a lot of thought to craft it in a way that works not only for urban areas, but for rural areas as well. And one of the things that I've always been for is a local option. If you do anything along these lines, never doing this voucher program without some local option where you allow local voters to decide what they want to do. In my view, these aren't issues that really should be debated and decided in Austin as much as they are that should be decided and debated in local communities by the parents and by the teachers in those communities who really are the ones that know what is best for their community. Four and I know how diverse this state is because we deal with people from all over the state every day that we're in Austin. And so I think, and that reminds, it always reinforces in me this thought that local people are best able to make local decisions in most cases. And so, we'll see where it goes. But the votes aren't there right now. The governor seems convinced that he can obtain the votes to start some kind of voucher program. And so, we see where it goes.
Yeah, we're definitely coming back for that at some point. He's indicated that more than once. I think the tax relief issue and maybe a few others will take priority in the near term, and then he'll call us back maybe towards the end of the summer or early fall for more discussions or more debates about that issue, universal school vouchers or some form of vouchers. The House recently, last week, appointed a new select committee on educational opportunity that includes the chair of public education and roughly 2/3 of the members from that committee, but some new additional members as well. And my sense is that it's that committee that will then focus a lot on those issues in the House, and the Senate probably will continue to operate, the way they're operating. They have passed a universal voucher bill already and certainly support that with almost unanimity. So I think Senator Nichols was probably the only senator that voted against it, if I remember correctly. And so it will be interesting to see how it goes forward. John's exactly right. What works great in Houston or in Dallas or in Corpus Christi is not necessarily representative and beneficial for those of us that live west of I-35 or in a rural community. And I know Amarillo, for those of us that are sitting in here, don't consider Amarillo to be necessarily rural, but everything around us is. And, in most of these proposals that have come forward, anything that is to the detriment of, in many cases, the largest employer, and in many cases, the center of community activity, which is the schools, and is taking money out of that system, really is difficult for folks similarly situated to us to support. And I think, we are blessed with very good schools in our Panhandle area. We've got them, all over that are fantastic. There are private options, there's homeschooling options, there's virtual school network. There's a lot of choice and a lot of opportunity in that realm up here already, and a lot of flexibility among all of that. And so I feel like there's going to have to be a little more give and take, compromise, thought given to let's address a problem where that problem actually exists if we're going to do anything to move forward, and not necessarily try to paint the whole state with one broad brush and hope for the best. So I feel like we'll get, the opportunity to address it again here pretty quickly, but it's anybody's guess as to what will happen.
And of course, we saw towards the end of the session that the House did impeach Attorney General Ken Paxton, which I believe both of you were opposed to. And we're seeing now that his lawyers are actually arguing that the process in the House was essentially so rushed and bad that they should throw it out before it even goes to trial. What are y'all's thoughts on that?
Well, I was pretty outspoken about my view, and that is, I think, you don't just go around impeaching everybody. And in the history of Texas, we've only had two successful impeachments, one in 1917 and the other, I believe, in the mid-1970s. One was a governor and the other was a district judge. I think if you're going to go through an impeachment process, you've got to respect the rule of law, and you've got to respect basic constitutional due process rights of the person that you're attempting to impeach. And I don't think either one of those occurred in the House. And as examples, I would just say that there was no sworn testimony taken prior to the impeachment. It was mostly hearsay, actually what I would call triple hearsay, hearsay within hearsay within hearsay. And I think you have to have sworn testimony. You have to have witnesses who will come in and say and make specific factual allegations against the officer that you attempt to impeach. The other thing is that General Paxton was never given an opportunity to present what could be exculpatory information to the committee or to the full House, and that has always happened here in Texas. He was not even notified that the proceeding was taking place until the very end. The other thing that was very troubling is the House, contrary to its precedent, never adopted specific rules for the impeachment process. I complained about that, and when I did, we finally got a copy of rules the day that the impeachment was supposed to take place, but they weren't voted on by the House. They were dictated by someone, and so those were the rules that the proceeding went by. So my view is that what the Senate should do is what the lawyers say they should do, is dismiss the impeachment and send it back to the House for further proceedings. I'm not saying that the evidence isn't there or couldn't be there, but I think it has to be developed, and you have to go through the normal process. The reason I would urge the Senate to do that is because I think it's essential to preserve the predicate for future legislatures. Right now, we have a state government that's controlled in all branches by Republicans, by one party. It hasn't always been that way, and in the future, it may not be that way. And this could be very dangerous precedent if you have a divided government, where you have a legislature that's controlled by the Democrats and a governor who's a Republican, or vice versa. I think the precedent and the process need to be preserved so that impeachment is truly a very extraordinary event that's reserved for those particular situations in which it's deserved. And as I say, it may be in this case. I don't know, because we haven't had the evidence developed. But I think you have to go back and do this the right way instead of the wrong way.
I think these proceedings should be exceedingly rare, and they have been throughout our history. We did not know as a body that the investigation that the General Investigating Committee had been undertaking since late February or early March had been going on. And if you know anything about the Capitol, it's an incredibly difficult place to keep any sort of activity secret. But they did a very good job of keeping their efforts quiet and confidential. And so the end result of their efforts was a couple hours, 2.5 hour hearing, which is archived. You can go back and watch that. And we received, as House members, the ability to watch that, and we had the ability to receive the written transcript of the hearing, which was investigators reporting to the committee as to the results of their investigation. It had no other witnesses, nobody that was the subject of that transcript or that questioning was before the committee. None of them were sworn. There were questions, and I think this is where maybe our legal background, made that choice a difficult one, or a more analytical one than just how do you feel about General Paxton or these allegations. And I think that these decisions, especially something as important as impeachment of a statewide elected official, we should have no problem making that decision. Like, those decisions should be easy to make because the evidence is overwhelming, and that it is also indisputable about how it was gathered and the time it took to do it. So we received this information on a Wednesday, and were asked on Saturday during Memorial Day weekend to take the vote. So by and large, John and I have shared very similar feelings. We didn't talk a whole lot about it before the actual vote came up, but we share very similar opinions about the process. Could have been more lengthy, could have been a little better, maybe even get to the same resolution, I don't know. But, doing it the way it was done felt a little rushed and not in accordance with the way I would like to see a precedent set, because hopefully this never happens again, but we all know that it's very likely that at some point down the road there will be another issue like this. And when that happens, when they look back and say, well, how did the House do it last time? If they say it was done in a few hours with unsworn testimony by investigators providing this information to a committee, and that's all it took, then I'm afraid of what that could look like, and it could be used, in a more, nefarious way. And I just would hate to see that. And so for me, it was all about the process. It was all about how it was administered and what we could do to make that a little tighter and better for presidential purposes going forward.
And switching gears back to the progress that was made this session, we saw a $1.5 billion investment in broadband. That was originally proposed as $5 billion, but 1.5, I think everybody could agree we'll take it. Tell me a bit about how that looks and how that could affect the Panhandle. Carolee.
Well, we were thrilled for it. The broadband initiative that's happening in the Panhandle, we're calling ourselves Panhandle Connected, And we're needing those funds in addition to the grant money that we're seeking from the state and the federal government as well. Here in the Panhandle, we have wide swaths of unserved and underserved areas. I was also very happy to hear about some of the rules change and making sure those maps will be more accurate. Just for context, if you look at the current FCC maps, it makes it look like a lot of this Panhandle of Texas is served. That's because the providers can serve one house in a census area and call that census area served. But it also doesn't account for whether it's affordable. So they may have access to it, but they may not be able to afford it. The Texas Panhandle is one of the most expensive places in the nation to have broadband. I paid less when I lived in Manhattan than when I moved back home. So affordability is important as well. So we need all the investment we can get because particularly our rural towns are gonna get left behind. And as these new economic opportunities are coming in, we want to keep our kids here working remotely. If they want to live in Dumas and stay close to home, but they want to work somewhere with software development, we want them to have that opportunity so that they can stay home or come home, like some of us did. So broadband also is going to play right into healthcare, telehealth, mental health. So we need it for all aspects of life, whether it be economy, health, and education. So we were thrilled to hear about that and that support.
Well, once again, this is a rural area by and large, and it's hard to believe, but I've got residences in the district that I represent, I'm sure Ford does too, that have no broadband, that have no landline, and have no cell service. Now, this isn't 1860, this is 2023, and that's where we still are. We've made tremendous strides as far as you have to have landlines out there to be able to get cell service and also access to the internet in most cases, in some cases, I should say. But we also need to expand broadband. We need better communication in these rural areas. Two big reasons. One is safety issues. If there's an emergency, they need to be able to connect to get help, law enforcement or medical help. The other thing is just the economy, particularly our agricultural economy. It used to that ranchers would buy cattle, feed them, and then sell them. Now, a lot of cattle operators are buying and selling futures internationally on a daily basis, and they need access to communication. They need this broadband, quick access to communication to be able just to conduct normal operations in the commerce they engage in. And so this is essential for the development of our area. We're making a lot of progress. I think the broadband investment is certainly going to benefit rural areas, including the Panhandle. And we're hoping that, that we move some of these areas at least into the 20th century, and then we can go from there.
Yeah, it's such a good thing to see broadband as part of our overall infrastructure conversation in the legislature. Just for historical context, back in 2019, through a bill I authored and John helped me with, we passed the bill to create the Governor's Council on Broadband Development, and that was a first step. It's a drum we've been beating out here in West Texas for a long time. We need to do more to actually affect the underserved and unserved areas across the state, and we have a whole lot of them here in the Panhandle. And then in 2021, we came back and passed House Bill 5, which established the office, the Broadband Development Office, under the umbrella of the Texas Controller. And that allows us to pull down more federal money to really accelerate the implementation of broadband throughout all these areas. And now with this new appropriation and better mapping, we're going to see the proliferation and the service better, we're going to increase accessibility across Texas quicker. And I don't want to give anybody an impression that it's going to happen overnight, because I think it's going to take a long time, several years in many cases, to get folks served and connected. But we've said it a million times, it's so important. I mean, there are just very few things we do anymore that aren't some way, shape, or form connected to the internet, and whether it's commerce or healthcare or safety or education or job training, you name it, it is really becoming more and more important. So the quicker we can get this done, and this appropriation goes a long way, the better. I know we were asking for a lot more money. Many of us would love to have seen that, but as our appropriation process goes through its paces, I think we should be pretty happy with $1.5 billion directed towards this effort. It's something we'll continue to fund, I believe, here in the next several sessions.
And I want to hear from all three of you about the bills that y'all think were passed this session that have the best benefit for the region.
Well, you know, and I'm glad you asked that question, because there's so many things that we did that affect everybody, you know, statewide, you know, especially through this $321 billion budget that we've got. So many services get funded that do affect us. But what won't make, you know, the headlines in the Texas Tribune or probably in many papers or news outlets across state, three things that I worked on that I'm proud of here at home. One was securing, and John, I think, was very supportive of this throughout the entire process too, securing funding of $159 million for a state mental hospital facility here in Amarillo in the Panhandle that will serve this area, that will help not only folks that reside here, but law enforcement. One thing that we hear all the time is if you work at a county or you work in a county sheriff's department, how awful it is to have folks who are repeat offenders who have mental health and behavioral health problems languish in county jails for a long time. It's bad for the taxpayers, it's bad for those individuals. And for them to get a bed in a state hospital can take months and months and months. And that's sometimes even, you know, in the best case scenario. So, you know, that will start the wheels turning on the development of that facility that will serve the Panhandle. I think that's great. We also passed legislation that was needed, kind of a very important piece of the puzzle for a producer-owned beef facility right here in Amarillo that will process beef, that will create a bunch of jobs, and it is a municipal management district that allows them to get favorable financing and to create a specialized wastewater treatment facility. And I'm very happy that moved forward, because I think that's great for our area, not just the city of Amarillo, but the entire Panhandle. And then finally, something we've been working on for a long time, which is to give our retired city employees in Amarillo and in cities like Amarillo a cost of living adjustment. They have been prevented from having that because of the catch-up penalty through TMRS. And so, for instance, retired police officers in the city for over 10 years have been unable to access a cost of living adjustment. And that's something that became too financially impossible for cities like Amarillo to ever afford if they had to pay for all the years they didn't give one before they could give one again in the future. So we created the bill that allows a short window of time for cities like Amarillo, and there's more than 35, 40 of them across the state, to allow that cost of living adjustment right now to not only reward and keep retirement monies competitive for their retirees, but then it's also a good recruitment tool. Every city in the state of Texas has a problem getting good law enforcement to come work in their community. So this is an excellent recruitment tool to say, we are coming back and we're going to be able to provide a cost of living adjustment. So that's something that cities like ours here in the Panhandle, but elsewhere, will benefit from, and really glad to see all that happen.
And I think all of the things four mentioned are really big things for our area. You know, a smaller thing that we worked on together was to restore the funding for the meats processing program at West Texas A&M, which was good. And another thing was community colleges like where we are today, Amarillo College, have not fared well in recent years in the funding battles. They've seemed to always take second place to the four-year universities. But this was a good year for a good session for community colleges, and I think it's going to help the community colleges, particularly Amarillo College, a lot. One other battle that four and I fought continuously during the session was there was this unprecedented attack on wind energy. It's hard to imagine, but you know, wind energy has been a good thing for the Texas Panhandle. We've had a number of landowners who have benefited from being able to rent their land, lease their land for wind purposes, to get royalties from those. But the big benefit has been to rural schools and county governments. The tax that they've been able to realize from those wind turbines and that wind development has been really has been revolutionary in terms of what it's been able to do for those districts as far as building new facilities, enhancing the programs for those rural districts that are really hurting. And so it's something that I think is important for us to maintain. And it's been a win-win for everyone. I mean, because it's cheaper energy. Most of the wind, the majority of wind produced in this area isn't even used in this area. It goes into the CREZ line. It's used in the ERCOT, which is downstate. And once again, I'm glad we're not in ERCOT. Always say that. And so but our energy, we're exporting it. And the best part about wind, it uses no water or no significant water. And if anything that we can get in this area that produces income and doesn't use water, it's a good deal, believe me.
I agree with all of those. I also think that there was some movement towards mental health for children and getting access. Our kids have not been okay for a while, especially coming out of the pandemic. In fact, suicide is the second leading cause of death in young people ages 10 to 35. So addressing those needs early is really, really important, and making sure that our kids have access to that. I was also have to echo with the community college. I think we're so fortunate to have Amarillo College here, and we're fortunate to have Frank Phillips and Clarendon College in our rural communities, because we are starting to really understand that four-year degrees are not for everyone. Having a credential of value can make a life change for someone. And I'm saying that as someone who has a 49-year-old husband who went back to school to get another credential of value at Amarillo College. And I've had conversations with Doug Loomis too about how in the past we've failed our kids, telling them that a four-year degree is the only way they're gonna be successful. The result of that is in Memphis, Texas, they have one plumber and he's retiring this year. They have no plumbers. So we're not even, we gotta go make sure that we have people in the trades, because we need them as well as we need people who understand AI and that sort of thing. And community colleges are just so important for that. So for me, it was the focus on mental health and that workforce alignment of what we're needing in our rural communities.
And I know Four has something to add to that, but before he does, we're about to get ready for questions. And so we have microphones lined up on either side of the room if y'all want to go ahead and get your questions ready. And Four, go ahead.
One thing I didn't want to leave this area of the conversation without saying and emphasizing was that there is one thing none of us can do without, one thing that we depend on every day, which is our water. And this session, we took another, I think, extraordinary step in passing legislation that will give the voters in November an opportunity to approve, which is the creation of the new State Water Fund and State Water Development Fund, which will, really address, it's just a beginning, but we are appropriating $1 billion to this effort to not only address the infrastructure needs across Texas, and that's the leaky pipes part of it. We got municipalities and folks all over Texas who there's a lot of waste that is occurring with regard to how their municipal water is being used and how that can be better conserved, and we need to do that. We also have a more robust development fund, which will really emphasize and incentivize and make more economically feasible technologies like aquifer storage and recovery, more desalination. It's really important for Texas as we continue to grow, and we are 30 million strong now, and state demographers are telling us we're going to be 50 million here in shortly, probably 20 years. If we don't start to lay the groundwork for more efficient water development and systems that will, conserve the water that we're using, then we will find ourselves in a really bad spot. So I'm glad to see the state prioritize that and create this effort. It's something we'll be able to build on in the future, and really, really glad to see it. And the last thing I'll say here was if you like state parks like I do, there'll be an opportunity that we're carving out more funds to acquire land and do more with our robust state park system across Texas, which I think is fantastic. And hopefully those will, be approved in November, and we'll be off and running.
Let's go ahead and start over here.
Alan Abraham, Amarillo, retired. What's with the trend in the state legislature to take away local control versus state control. Is this an ideological argument, or can you give their real practical value for this trend? Because it seems to be going on now for a couple of legislatures, right? More than 2 or 3 legislatures.
Well, the problem is, as I said, Texas is a very big state. It's a very diverse state. The problems that we see developing in places like Houston and Austin don't occur up here. In this part of the country, we pretty much trust our local officials to do what they do. They meant to make these decisions. And Ford and I both have always tried to respect that line of demarcation. There have been some abuses that have occurred in some of the larger cities, both in the city level and the county level, where they have, some of these municipalities have overstepped their boundaries, in our view, of what they've regulated you can do and can't do. And so that's been the reason that the legislature has stepped in. Unfortunately, many of these measures affect our area as well. For instance, last session, not this session, but last session, we passed a bill that prohibited cities from defunding their police departments. And we've never had that problem really in the Panhandle of Texas, but it has been a problem, for instance, in Austin, where they had a huge defund movement, which has precipitated in large part a very serious increase in crime in the city. And so it's a balance you've always got to exercise. We also have this with school districts as well, where everybody's for local control, but then we've seen what's happened in Houston. We've seen in other areas where you have these problems that develop, and the school district doesn't either seem willing or able to deal with it. And so the legislature steps in those circumstances. So I would say that it's an area that you have to carefully balance, and I still think local control is the best in virtually every situation.
Yeah, I don't disagree with John. Alan, that is something that I think if you want to call it a trend, it's certainly getting a lot more attention in many cases over the last couple of sessions, and this session that we just concluded. And much of it, when you go back and look at the root cause of the issues that we're actually voting on or dealing with, they didn't occur in Perryton or Dalhart or Amarillo. They occurred in a city like Houston or sometimes Austin, for instance. And their method of city government sometimes looks incredibly different from ours. And so when we have and I always say, and I know John's the same way, my relationship with local city mayors, councils, county commissioners, sheriffs, superintendents, they are our eyes and ears, and we have big districts. And so we stay in constant communication with regard to what the issues are that they're dealing with and what makes sense for them. And I was a little surprised to find out that is not the case at the state level with many of my colleagues. They come from a place, for instance, Harris County. I'll just use them as an example. 5 million people in Harris County, 24 House members. They don't have that kind of relationship with their county commissioners or their superintendents. In some cases, it's very adversarial. And so they end up making decisions or using examples. Some of them are really good examples of what needs to be corrected. And then you end up taking a vote on it, but it does affect us, back in a smaller, more rural community. And sometimes we don't always agree on that, but, I guess the joke is we're for local control until we're not, and so sometimes those are the issues that come up that really cause us to try to thread the needle John's talking about.
And let's go over here.
Tracy Shane from Amarillo. The Texas Workforce Commission has been well funded for providing training for W-2 employees, and we're doing a good job of that. I think it's very important, but we don't have any Texas Workforce Commission programming designed to help create the next round of employers. We're not doing anything to help plant seeds for future employers, and so we're spending money but we're not spending money to help grow new businesses. And I was wondering if you both would, I know you're not on those committees, But what are your thoughts about that? And would you be willing to talk to other committee members who are on the appropriate committees to help change that?
Well, first of all, yeah, that's something that I don't think we should ever preclude or foreclose, opportunities as we evolve and see the demands that are out there, what should be addressed. And so have no problem at all talking to those committee members or the commission itself, seeing what their long-term goals are and what they're doing to better address some of the needs that are out there. Fortunately, in different communities are different. We have things like the Small Business Development Center and the Enterprise Center here affiliated with WT and things like that are entrepreneurial in nature and helping folks establish businesses that are outside what the Workforce Commission does. It's been historically focused on the employees and job training. And so, as I mentioned at the beginning of this, program, there just aren't, there's huge demand for a workforce out there. So right now their hands are full, I know, trying to sort of do what they do with regard to job training. But we aren't going to be in this situation forever, so I appreciate that feedback, and I think it would be something we could spend some good effort on developing, not just the employee side, but the employer side as well.
Thank you.
And for those who are watching from remotely, we're in a building right now that's the Innovation Outpost of Amarillo, a brand new building, still under development. And as hard as it is to understand, they're preparing young people for jobs that don't necessarily exist right now, but will exist in the next year or two. That's incredible. We've never done that before. And so that's, our community colleges have taken the lead in that. And a Workforce Commission certainly is part of that project, but I think you raise a very good point.
Thank you.
And over here.
Yes, my name is Claudia Stravato. I teach at WT in the Political Science Department. And I want to address one of the many cultural, social, and personal rights issues that the legislature meddled in this past session. Under what constitutional, statutory, or moral basis would a Texas legislature ban medical care to any American citizens by interfering with parental rights to obtain medical care for their children, by interfering with the doctor-patient relationship, and by ignoring the testimony of physicians and medical societies from all over the state and the country, and say that this medical care for trans children is safe and needed?
So I'll jump in there, John, and this is one of the votes, I think, before the program you said you disagreed with my votes. You put it a little more succinctly than that, Claudia, but that was, I'm guessing, one of the ones. I sit on and used to chair the Public Health Committee. I'm still a member of that committee, and that is the committee, the bill that you're referring to that was ultimately passed, that's the committee it came through. And while we probably disagree on this issue, what I will tell you is there is no constitutional violation because we protect the rights and the well-being and the health of children a number of different ways. Now, the legislature believes, after hearing the testimony, that in crafting an exception in the bill, that gender modification of a minor, surgical procedures, the prescription of puberty blockers, those are examples of what is prohibited under the bill for a minor, should not occur. And that those minors that choose as adults to proceed with those procedures or medical treatments or options is not prohibited. So, by the testimony the committee heard, hours and hours and hours, a lot of issues that I had never thought about, had never really been exposed to. The detransitioning side of it is one. That is, these in many cases, irreversible, life-changing decisions that are being made at a young age, and sometimes the parents were in disagreement on it. So when it comes down to making or establishing a framework, and if you'd asked me 10 years ago, is this the kind of issue that I'd be dealing with in the legislature, I would have never believed it. But when it comes down to should there be a framework in place, and there were issues like that, there were issues about college sports involvement, things of that nature. It was thoroughly debated, and there were lots of differences of opinion. But I think the opinion that I ultimately reached was it is not something that I would be comfortable with voting against, because I felt like the parents are involved, the medical procedures out there are available later when you're an adult and can make your own decision. And in many cases, the risk of an irreversible condition, if a mind is changed down the road, is something, and that harm was something that was too great for me to ever get comfortable with.
And the hardest thing, and I listened to some of the testimony in the Health Committee, I can tell you the most heart-wrenching testimony that I think I've ever heard in the legislature. You see these teenagers who come in and their bodies were mutilated as young children, or else they were given some kind of a puberty blocker where the normal process of maturity was not allowed to take place in their body. That will affect their lives for the rest of their lives. They will never be the same. And to see what it's done to their lives, and now they wish that had never been done in the first place. And we've destroyed a good part of those lives, and it's just not right to do that to children. Children don't have the intellectual ability to make those kinds of life decisions, in my judgment. And the parents some parents, as hard as it is to believe, don't necessarily have the best interest of their children at heart. And so our job, I keep telling people, my two jobs, as I see it, my three jobs: I protect babies, children, and old people. And as far as I'm concerned, those are the three most important things I do as a member of the legislature. And so, before and I both voted for that legislation, and I'm glad we did for it.
All right, and we have time for one more question.
Thank you so much. Thank you to the Texas Tribune for hosting this event at a venue that was provided by Amarillo College. Thank you, Representative Price, for voting for the Herrero Amendment, which was that first attempt to abolish any opportunity to create education savings accounts, also known as school vouchers. Thank you both for voting for HB 100 that was sponsored by Representative King. It certainly would have increased the basic allotment for our students. In terms of the basic allotment, with the talks of education savings accounts or school vouchers being provided to the effect of approximately $8,000, which is $1,840 more than the basic allotment per pupil spending for students in public education, can we address that disparity? Is there any way to articulate the message that our public schools are the most inclusive setting for ensuring the success of all 5.4 million Texans who are in our public schools? In addition to that, I have a question related to community college, higher education level. What do you believe are the negative effects, or what message is the legislator sending with the passage of Senate Bill 17, which is now signed into law, that now essentially bans all diversity, inclusion, and those types of offices from our community colleges? What are you sending as a message to persons of color who attend these community colleges and universities throughout our great state?
Thanks for the question. And I'll go first real quick. I know we don't have much time. I'll answer the second one first, which I think, what Patrick is referring to is the elimination of DEI offices in our institutions of higher education across the state. I think that has started off in many cases, and we heard lots of examples of what that actually would do. And it got discussed in connection with admissions, which is separate than the DEI offices that were operating on campuses. In many cases, there were instances, I think, that folks felt like that was something public dollars shouldn't be going to advance necessarily in the DEI offices. Again, not admissions, because that is separate and apart. But the conversation, at least on the floor, the debate crossed those streams quite often. And so folks thought they were either voting in many cases on admissions or not admissions, or on DEI offices or not, but they were completely separate. I think it was clear that the will in both chambers were to stick more to curriculum and fund the needs of the universities and leave those offices out. And that's where we are. I think with regard to House Bill 100, I wish that had passed both chambers. I think the effort given to increasing public education funding took lots of different paths, and that was a very good one. And it would have been more sustainable over time with automatic increases, and I think that would have been helpful too. And I think that, ultimately, with school safety being funded separately, there was some good language in House Bill 100 that didn't make it, but some of that got put into House Bill 3. So I'm glad. I think there's a lot of work to do. Doug and I have talked about some of the deficiencies both at the local level and probably statewide that will occur because of what's now being required for school safety. But I think we are in a much better spot on that issue than we were when we started the session. But we need to get to a point where we can see exactly how deficient we are in dollars and see what we can do to make that up.
All right, and with that, we are out of time. I just want to have one last reminder that if y'all enjoy events like this today and want to see more like this happening, not just in Austin, but like here in Amarillo, to please join as a Tribune member at texastribune.org/donate. Thank you again for joining us here, and thank you to our panelists. So, thank y'all.